Let's be fair and square for a moment. The 2020s aren't being the most exciting laps for the franchise. There hasn't been any info for 5 years tops, and ever since the final Super episode, only the new Broly movie hype and the curiosity around superhero managed to light that char, since Toyotaro's manga mostly receives lukewarm opinions. Regardless of how you may view the show, you have to acknowledge that once they drop the news, everyone literally stops, even for a limited time. Which is what happened a few weeks ago, and all of a sudden, the fourth installment of Budokai Tenkaichi was announced 16 years later. That, folks, was the 18th confirmation that Dragon Boru, in spite of its issues, will always make a name for itself. But this will be a story for another day, since today's topic is Resurrection of F. Yes. Not the movie though, the Future Trunks edition, the one released in August 2016, between episodes 55 and 56 of Dragon Ball Super, in the middle of the Future Trunks arc, which does raise a few points. For instance, what does Goku Black have to do with the Resurrection of F? I'm not sure, maybe it meant to sound like an excuse for Trunks to narrate events that belong to the past, regardless of the importance within that specific scenario. And most of all, what's with the Fukatsu no Frieza title, despite retelling the original war against the space tyrant in the Namek arc? Well, the fairest answer would be clickbait title, because the events of the movie, released a year prior, are not mentioned in Trunks' narration at all. Then what's with the title? Absolutely nothing, unless you count a very specific name, Tadayoshi Yamamuro, the long-running Model Sheath designer, the main supervisor of the 2010s, who happens to direct the special as well as the 2015 movie. And no matter what you think of it story-wise, literally anyone seems to agree with its direction being stale and bland, and this special edition is no exception. Not to mention that Hollow Shelf, the supervisor he used to be in the 90s, appears to struggle with model linearity and symmetry. I can definitely see the purpose of this remake, because it's essentially an abridged version of the Namek arc events, with Yamamuro recreating Toriyama's original panels more or less accurately, which isn't necessarily a bad thing, yet something is off about its execution. So let's try to analyze how Yamamuro and Dragon Ball Z differently handle the source material. A very livid Frieza descends and seeks revenge upon his immortality, which was denied. Surprisingly, episode 77 handles this scene way better than a TV special. The Dragon Team's poses look rather natural, and that shot of enraged Frieza is a classic. Sure, his face has no veins popping up, and Masaki Sato's character acting is a bit dated, but does manage to capture his furious mood, whereas Yamamuro's Frieza looks mildly upset. It's got veins popping up this time, but everything feels so stiff, from the Dragon Team's stock reaction to no gaping mouth. In fact, I was amazed to find out the previous shot was depicted more accurately in Minoru Kazaki's episode, in spite of him generally taking too many liberties, often to his detriment. However, Frieza's first transformation in the Trunks special is the spitting image of Toriyama's version, with Yamamuro's unnecessarily bulky tissues making movements more rigid, which would normally be fine with its taller second form, but overall I feel something's still missing. Of course, while this is literally a spitting image of the original manga, it doesn't mean it's good by default. In fact, this is a correct scene, perhaps way too correct. There is no color variation, no glimpse of creativity whatsoever or different expressions. Only the bare minimum. On the other hand, episode 78 handles it in a much more brazen and elaborate manner, with more crafty effects and dynamism thanks to Yoshihiro Ueda's direction and Yamamuro's very key animation. And even though it takes more liberties, it's potentially a better scene. Only potentially, because not only Mitsuo Shindo's supervision isn't that pleasing, but also they decided to include an obnoxious filler in between, with Bulma being chased by dinosaurs, which is a disgusting idea. What a way to murder a scene, by blocking its spacing. Pleasure and pain for Dragon Ball Z, I suppose. Frieza in his third form, blasting Piccolo, is once again a correct representation of Toriyama's panels, but compared to Yamamuro's own work in episode 82, doesn't come off as that animated. Onto Vegeta's offensive, the framing of his Gallic Hole is one-to-one to the source material, but again, its notable meticulousness should theoretically equal a proper execution, which is still not the case either. As a matter of fact, this scene contains everything wrong with modern Yamamuro designs, from its vacant, stuck, boring expressions to restrained freedom to modify movements. Piccolo warning Vegeta looks just so baffling for how boring this framing happens to be. Characters' tissues appear as permanently tense, even when they're supposed to be relaxed. Therefore, given such a premise, the animation looks way too mechanical and simplistic for it to work. And that shot of Vegeta's crying, it is a low point. A very low point. Does this expression recall frustration, terror and angst? No, it looks like an average angry Vegeta plus the sperm tears. Moreover, it doesn't even resemble Toriyama's creation that much, unlike episode 85, which made it a lot more unconventional by having Kaio narrate Vegeta's crisis, a clever idea since late Yoshi Yanami voiced both him and the narrator, and by actually describing his despair properly. Shida's grimace and teary eyes totally give the idea of a character snarling and weeping in pure terror, also displaying some of Kazuhito Kikuchi's best imagery in the original run. That said, even the original run bump into duds, due to taking too many liberties sometimes, and not necessarily for the best, as seen in Goku's utterly underwhelming entrance. Teruisa Ryu's character art is paradoxical, as it manages to look extremely angular and also extremely dull, which makes him the weaker Shindo artist, on equal terms with Shindo himself sadly. Conversely, the 2016 version is at least pretty solid. Yamamuro knows how to stick to character sheets just fine, and I actually have to praise him for omitting grey gloss on Goku's hair in this nice looking shot, just like his Goku Black design, which is also free from facial gloss. Too bad it only happens in this distance, since the remaining cuts features very common Lego hair, which is frankly detestable. Yet the core of this breakdown is about to arrive, as Frieza apparently survives the Genkidama and seeks revenge against Goku's partners, first Piccolo and then Kuririn. But before the main event, a few minor things like Kuririn's death, whose smoke does a bit resemble Hitoshi Naba's, but Yama's supervision is just too tight to make a concrete assumption. Needless to say, the whole segment is 100% faithful to the manga. Angles, framings and even hand gestures follow the source material inside out. Unlike episode 95, which actually alters Frieza's early intent, as he aims at Goku directly, but Piccolo shields himself to take the bullet, thus essentially swapping the panel order. And I have to be honest, apart from Gohan's sorrowful expression, which looks hilarious, the whole execution is improvable. It's really nothing too exciting. Unfortunately, this also includes Kuririn's death, which looks fine on its own, but the Goku framing lacks the same intensity as in Toriyama's panel, because his pose appears too relaxed for being someone who shouts at Frieza's evil doing. Then we finally get to the main course, the very first Super Saiyan transformation awakened upon his past pal's demise. On a first impression, seems like the 2016 special blatantly retells Toriyama's version, but in actuality this is not even its most faithful representation, whose honor goes to the first Budokai installment 15 years prior, a perfect copy and paste of the manga panels. If anything, Yamamuro's version resembles the burst limit cutscene more, which results in not a bad idea as Toriyama's version is boring. Yes, that's what I just said. Toriyama handled Goku's first Super Saiyan transformation as if it weren't that special of a moment. He just snaps and poof, his hair color changes. There is no psychological payoff, there is no struggle. I mean, there must be a fair reason why the anime scene is remembered so much. Not necessarily because everyone grew up with it, but more like for emphasizing Goku's struggling rage in a way Toriyama couldn't accomplish. After all, Shigeyasu Yamauchi often proved he could magnify transformation segments, and Sato is always a reliable artist even during Studio Junior's decline. As for the 2016 version, while it may not reach the same heights as 95, it also succeeds in being better than the original. Sure, there is one single framing that looks a bit bland, fortunately Yuya Takahashi is no pushover. Even under tight corrections, his huge talent stands out rather easily. He's the utter protagonist of the best scenes of the TV special, as his aggressive timing and effects are so recognizable during the Kamehameha section, and I really dig how his curved eyebrows and fluid hair do appear in shots. Although I'm not secure whether it's entirely his work, but at least part of the choreographed slice of action afterwards is his key animation, albeit looking slightly less aggressive, possibly due to corrections, but what else can I say? We are dealing with a rather competent segment, this time faithful to the source material, in which Goku physically overwhelms Frieza, whose full power has been draining him for a while. In spite of Yamamura's bulky muscles, Takahashi's performance is strong enough not to make it too problematic, and once Frieza stands up, Ken Otsuka finishes the scene with him suffering more physical damage. Overall, it doesn't digress from the manga that much, it's choreographed quite well and the structure is very polished. Now then, how did DBZ handle this section? The better question would be, how did DBZ not handle this section? For some reason, episode 103 decided to stress each blow up to 11, counting on dramatizing their emotions, especially Frieza's, and shaking up entire panels. The belly punch animated by Izada, which barely lasts 2 seconds in Trunks' special, endures a dramatic slow-mo leading to the end of the first half, while the rest is taken on during the second, in which Takeuchi kills Toriyama's choreography due to his very poor timing and above all, due to Toei's bad habit of emphasizing even the silliest details. As a result, this section comes off as totally disjointed, as if each framing lacked cohesion and belonged to a whole different scene. Besides, this is the only time Dragon Ball undergoes an animation switch in the same cut, from Takeuchi to Tate, which is so unusual, since it usually happened in plenty of Bob Clampett's cartoons in the 40s, seldom in Chuck Jones and Fritz Freleng's shorts, not to mention a few Tom and Jerry shorts. Then again, considering 103 had uncredited Miyahara, Okimoto and Nakatsuru pop up in the end, it must have definitely been a tough episode to wrap up, which by default explains the production difficulties during late Namek arc. Lastly, the You Fool finale, which Frieza attempts to blast Goku behind his back, but quickly regrets such a move as the Super Saiyan obliterates him for good. Since mangas are read right to left, action tends to start from a right position in order to move to the opposite side, which is exactly what occurred in both the manga and the 2016 special, whereas 105 does the reverse process, with action moving left to right. That is okay, because it's not the main issue here. The scene itself looks solid, Taichiro Wara's effects are pretty good, but I just don't like Mitsuru Hashimoto's picks, especially as far as music placement goes, as swapping ominous organs with a generic battle theme feels such a terrible move, which succeeds in draining any single inch of drama and tension stockpiled beforehand. Such a pity given how tremendous both Yurusei Nakao and Masako Nozawa's vocals sounded. That was a disastrous decision. On top of that, the iconic uncanny expression on Goku upon defeating Frieza was the cherry on top of Toriyama's narration. On this day, nobody knows which feeling is supposed to communicate: anger, regret, sympathy, which confirms how fascinating the mystery surrounding it gets to be, which is unfortunately missing in the anime, as Wara's version conveys a mere disdainful look. I'm not saying it's a bad artist, far from it, but that sense of confusion and bewilderment is completely absent in this take, which was actually part of Goku's personality. He's become a Super Saiyan, not just a ruthless beast. The Trunks edition seems to nail that expression, even though following such heavy-going designs becomes a handicap in the long run. Overall, 7 years later, this TV special turns out to be the mirror of both pros and cons of modern Yamamuro, whose solidity, albeit never argued, resulted in looking a bit uninspired and monotonous for modern standards. Nevertheless, whilst not as shameful as the Resurrection of F movie, it can still be viewed as an improvable product, with the second half resulting in being far stronger than the first, thus narrowly managing to surpass Dragon Ball Z or even the very creator. I severely criticized Yamamuro in the 2010s for not being as good as he was, but in hindsight, we're all humans, we all have our ups and downs. Any artist meets his peak and also his decline, be it a musician, an animator, or even a YouTuber. Someone eventually realizes when to stop in order to leave memories intact, while others simply carry on regardless of their outputs. I suppose it's part of the game known as life.